I want to talk to you guys about fads and fashions and how they can be popular for one moment and then lose all popularity in the next moment. And they can get replaced by something that before was seen as out of style. You can have something that is considered hip and cool lose popularity to something that is practical. I remember when I was in junior high, high school, and anyone who is in my generation probably also remembers this, when you would walk into a campus and it was riddled with students with their pants sagging down and their underpants would be exposed. And this was considered gangsta. It was considered hip. It was considered cool. And now you don't really see that anymore. At least I don't. And it really has lost fashion. It's lost its popularity. And before, you had rappers who were walking around with their pants sagging down and it was considered hip and cool. And now you have rappers walking around with suits calling themselves entrepreneurs because sagging your pants down and exposing your underpants really isn't something to be proud of. And so they turned to business and corporate attire as a way to present themselves as practical people, fashionable people, because the pants sagging down fashion lost its trendiness. This has been a pattern of human behavior for thousands of years. So I'm going to now read to you guys an excerpt from Thucydides. Thucydides, in his first book on the Peloponnesian War, talks about how in far, far antiquity, in what he considered ancient times, just to give you guys a perspective as to how old of a time period we're speaking of here. In times that were more ancient than Thucydides, the Athenians adopted a luxurious style of dress. They had a simpler style before, but then they said, no, we're going to dress up in a more fancy way. And Thucydides talks about how this fashion lost its fashionableness. It was no longer fashionable to dress up in this luxurious way. So I want to read to you guys this excerpt. The Athenians were the first to lay aside their weapons and to adopt an easier and more luxurious mode of life. Indeed, it is only lately that their rich old men left off the luxury of wearing undergarments of linen and fastening a knot of their hair with a tie of golden grasshoppers, a fashion which spread to their Ionian kindred, and long prevailed among the old men there. So he talks about how the wealthy people of Athens, they adopted this luxurious style of dressing, and then they forsook it. They forgot about it. They threw it out. And then he talks about the Spartans or the Lacedaemonians. And he says, on the other hand, a modest style of dressing, more in conformity with modern ideas, was first adopted by the Lacedaemonians, the rich doing their best to assimilate their way of life to that of the common people. So he says that a simpler way of dressing was in conformity with modern ideas. And in his context, modern ideas is in ancient times. This is a very long time ago, even before the generation of Thucydides. So he talks about how in a time way before his own generation, there was this fashion for dressing up in a very luxurious way, and then it lost its popularity. And a dress code that was more in conformity to this time was a simple attire, a more simple way of dressing. And it reminds me of things that I have noticed. So, for example, in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s, there was this trend of restaurants serving extremely pretentious meals. I mean, really pretentious meals. You walk into a restaurant and you're paying $200 for these small little servings that the waiter would serve to you one by one. And so they'll give you these little tiny servings, and each plate is supposed to be like culinary art. And you're supposed to appreciate the experience. And so you walk into this restaurant, and they're going to serve you some very, very pretentious cooking. I don't know. You may get like a softly grilled, one softly grilled scallop caught in the oceans of Norway somewhere, served with a rosemary oil and a shrimp semen reduction. Something crazy like that. Like really, really nutty stuff. And this style of cooking has lost its popularity. It has lost its fashion. You know, this whole thing where you walk into a restaurant and they serve you these little tiny portions and this little tiny the special fish that's been cooked in this extremely difficult way, and it takes forever, with a sauce that takes like 3 days to cook, and the meat has been marinated in this brine that takes hours to prepare. You know, they slow cook the tomatoes and the carrots and the onions and for like 48 hours, and then they take the stew and they put it through a sieve, and then they take the liquid and they reduce that and they mix it with like a wine reduction, and they just like lightly put it on a plate and they serve it with like a grilled piece of salmon heart or kidney or something. Like this way of cooking, it's insane, right? It's insane. And that is no longer popular. It's no longer popular. Marco Pierre White, one of the most famous chefs of our time, and really one of the earlier pioneers of the culture of the celebrity chef, began in the pretentious cooking industry back in the day. I think it was back in the 80s and 90s. He was in that business. I think he was the youngest chef to get a 3 Michelin star for his restaurant. And he ran this restaurant in England called Aubergine. And it was one of those pretentious restaurants. And Marco Pierre White today is not in that business anymore. He literally is running pubs in the UK. He owns a string of pubs in the UK, and he himself has said that this older style of cooking, with all the pretentious meals and the high prices, it's no longer popular. People want simple food. People want to walk into a restaurant. They want to get a plate of French fries and some fish, some fried fish, and I don't know, some meatloaf. People want to walk into a restaurant. They want to get that Philly cheesesteak and a cold beer. People don't care about some duck foie gras deep fried in alpaca fat or something crazy like that. So that is an example of a trend shifting from fancy to simple. There's another thing that I have noticed. People more and more getting interested in living in the countryside. I have noticed this for years. Even before COVID, I began to notice this trend of people wanting to go to a simpler way of life. Enough of the high rises, enough of the apartments. There was a strong popularity for living in the downtown district of some major city, right? In the middle of New York City, in the middle of Paris, in the middle of Madrid, in the middle of Rome. There was this strong fashion. And a lot of that was led by women. I hate to say it, but it's the fact. It's the truth. A lot of it was led by women. You have these women who were like, I want to live in Paris. I want to live in the middle of San Francisco. I want to live in, oh my God, I want to live in New York City. I want to go out and just walk into like some French bakery and get some freshly baked bread. And, I want to get my snails, grilled escargot, snails and butter sauce, or some crazy stuff like that. And COVID did something quite extraordinary. COVID accelerated this desire to live a more simple life. It did. It really did. COVID accelerated the whole thing. People began to leave the cities in droves, and they started moving to southern states. They began to move to more rural areas or rural-like areas. They began to move to areas that have houses that have much more space in between them. People are now shifting more and more towards the country life, the country living. When COVID broke out and everybody was forced to stay home, the sale of chickens exploded exponentially. They flew up to the roof. People began to buy chickens like crazy. Myself included, I got chickens. And that was a sign of this trend. So the whole idea of living in this suburban house with a manicured lawn, that is not as strong as it used to be. It's still there, but it doesn't have the same popularity as it used to. People want to pursue a life of more self-sustainability. And part of that is getting chickens and gardening. And part of that is getting more land, having a bigger backyard, and without some crazy HOA, yelling at you because your grass is a 0.5 of a centimeter too high. So we see trends shifting from manicured lawn, living in suburbia, having no vegetables growing in your backyard, just having some bogus, basic, boring ass lawn, to actually using land. And that's one thing I could never understand about people. So many people, they will have backyards with just grass. And I've seen people with giant backyards, just a beautiful green lawn, nice manicured lawn. What the hell are you doing with the land? The land is there for you to grow food. The land is not there for you to grow some boring, weak-ass grass that doesn't do anything for you. You can't eat grass. And another thing that I've noticed, so you have people who have nice backyards, and then you tell them, hey, why don't you grow some food? Oh, I just go to the store and get it. I just go to the store. That way of thinking is losing its ubiquitousness. It's losing its presence. It's still there, don't get me wrong, but not as much. And people are becoming more and more interested in self-sustainability. It's a fascinating trend that I have been noticing, and I hope that it grows. I hope that it just continues to grow and grow. And this whole idol, this whole cult of the lawn will just die and go away. Of course, that's wishful thinking on my part, but nonetheless, I am happy that the current trend is becoming more and more in favor towards independent self-sustainability in your own backyard. And I understand you can't be self-sustaining in every single way. That's almost impossible. Even the Amish people depend on outsiders. That's why they have all these baking businesses. But we can be self-sustaining in some ways. And that is gripping some form of freedom that I think we would all cherish. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.
Swinging through the open sky, together we can try. I'm a member of a shore, eruptive below. So wherever I could be, sun is warming me. Plenty food and healthy feeds supports me to live. In the water, I got legs and I got views, still stronger than heels. In the water, through the channel to the sea, almost trying to be free. In the water, I would happily agree to be what I should be, what I should give up so easily and waste the body of the sea. So I try to be okay, follow plan and way. Family and friends are near, shielding from fear. I know the danger is away. Protection is so vague. But what already I can do, that's all I use. In the water, I got legs and I got views, still stronger than heels. In the water, through the channel to the sea, almost trying to be free. In the water, to the water, that's the only aim to me. To live what I shouldn't be, what I should give up so easily and waste the body of the In the water I should be.